All right. Welcome back. That was kind of a pathetic clap. I'm sorry. So how have you guys been enjoying the night so far? Yeah, me too. This has been fantastic. Hemant, Greta, Dave, all fantastic. I love you all. The next speaker to round out the night before the comedy section of the evening is Adam Lee. Atheist author and speaker from New York City. He says he became an atheist in college when one of his friends tried to convert him to young earth creationism and accidentally backfired, persuaded him towards atheism. He writes for the blog Daylight Atheism on the Big Think Media Network. He has been giving talks, doing podcasts. He was cited in Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. Have you heard of it? It's an obscure book. Okay, you have heard of it. Excellent. And also quoted in Elizabeth Dole's anti-atheist campaign attack ads. Who lost, by the way? She lost despite doing this. I'm going to credit Adam with that. His first book, titled Daily Atheism, was just published for Amazon Kindle with a hard copy coming out soon, which is really exciting. He's here to talk with us about bringing on social change in the face of the religious majority. Let's welcome Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Can you hear me? All right. In the mid-1800s, when America was torn apart by the bitter debate over slavery, there was one side that seemingly held the trump card. The distinguished politicians and preachers of the Confederacy could cite chapter and verse from the Bible, proving beyond any doubt that the buying and selling of human beings was a divinely approved practice. The Confederate President Jefferson Davis said that slavery was established by decree of Almighty God. It is sanctioned in the Bible, in both Testaments, from Genesis to Revelation. The Confederate Vice President, Alexander Stephens, said in his famous Cornerstone speech that slavery was in conformity with the ordinance of the Creator. The Great Seal of the Confederacy, their official national logo, bore the motto Deo Vindice, which means roughly, God is our defender. And the Southern Baptist Convention, still the nation's largest Protestant denomination, was originally formed expressly to defend the continued legitimacy of slavery. The great American abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who was born into bondage and later escaped to freedom, wrote that when his master was converted in a religious revival, it made him more cruel and hateful than before. He found religious sanction and support for his slave-holding cruelty. And again, when the women's suffrage movement began speaking up, demanding equality and the right to vote, they faced intense hostility from the Orthodox, who quoted the Bible as proof that women were meant to stay out of politics. The feminist champion Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "In the early days of women's suffrage agitation, I saw that the greatest obstacle we had to overcome was the Bible. It was hurled at us on every side. The ballot for woman was contrary to God's holy ordinance. Woman was born to be submissive, subjective. She must be subservient to her husband in all things and at all times." These were the admonitions of pulpit and press. Newspaper ads called suffragettes enemies of the home and of Christian civilization. Here's one of these newspaper ads which calls on, this is a real newspaper ad, which calls on men to vote against women's suffrage to protect the family. Sound familiar? It's amazing how much things have changed, right? For people alive today, it's hard to imagine that this horrendous racism and sexism was once the accepted mainstream view, defended by politicians and taught from the pulpits of the nation's largest and most powerful churches. But that's precisely the point. The reason it's so hard for us to imagine is because our attitudes have changed so much. They haven't changed completely, it's true. There's still prejudice in our society, probably more so than we'd like. But I think it's safe to say they've changed more than most people alive at those times would have ever thought possible. So how did this happen? During the era of the abolitionist movement, during the era of the women's suffrage movement, the churches were even more powerful, and their grip on society was even more absolute than it is today. And the people who wanted to change that were starting off with a huge handicap, in that so many of them were forbidden even to vote. But Despite the opposition arrayed against them, despite the hostility they faced, the reformers won. They abolished slavery and wrote universal suffrage into the Constitution. They pushed back against racism and sexism, depriving these ugly prejudices of most of their power and public respectability, to the point where today, the Church's past defense of them is viewed as a mark of shame, rather than a badge of pride. How did the progressive champions of the past do this? What made them such juggernauts of secular awesome? How did they go up against religious beliefs that were even more powerful and entrenched then than they are now, and triumph? This question is all the more urgent because in our time, the churches are again on the wrong side of progress, fighting against marriage equality, against birth control, against stem cell research, against teaching evolution in schools, promoting discrimination against atheists, and trying to tear down the wall of separation between church and state. We can't let them have their way on this. For the sake of human progress, it's vital that we win these battles. But I have to admit it, we're the underdogs in this fight. The churches are wealthy and powerful. Politicians bow down to them. Most people are afraid to offend them. Going up against them seems like trying to move a mountain. How can we do it? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I want to make a few suggestions. We have a wealth of history to draw from, and there are some patterns we see over and over in successful social movements. Whenever and wherever people saw an injustice and fought to correct it, there have been some tactics that consistently brought them victory, and I'm going to talk about some of those. First, get angry. Righteous, passionate, peaceful anger, outrage over mistreatment, outrage at injustice, is the backbone of every successful progressive movement. Anger is what motivates people to take action. It's what gives us passion for the fight, what gives us courage to stand up to ostracism and threats. Anger is what makes people understand our conviction and our sincerity. Anger, as you may know, if you've read a certain book by my friend Greta Christina, is the essential ingredient in bringing about social change. You may hear people say that if we seem to be angry, we'll turn the undecided against us and do our own cause more harm than good. These people are concern trolls trying to rob us of our most effective weapon. Don't listen to them. Listen to someone who fought injustice and won. Someone like Frederick Douglass, who said, "The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made have been born of earnest struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters." Second, use satire, mockery, and ridicule. Again, this is a point where concern trolls often make themselves heard, saying that we only arouse greater opposition if we make fun of people's cherished religious convictions. Well, I have an unanswerable authority to quote to them, the noted public policy expert, John Cleese of Monty Python. As he said, "If I can get you to laugh with me, you like me better, which makes you more open to my ideas. And if I can persuade you to laugh at the particular point I make, by laughing at it, you acknowledge its truth." Nothing gets someone on your side like making them laugh. It helps break down the stifling aura of solemnity and respect that religions have convinced themselves they deserve, and that they use to smother legitimate criticism. And it communicates more eloquently than any cool philosophical argument ever could that it's okay not to believe this stuff. As the famous journalist and social critic H.L. Mencken said, one horse laugh is worth 10,000 syllogisms. When we thumb our noses at religious taboos, as you can see here, we show how silly and pointless they are, and by their disproportionate rage, the guardians of orthodoxy make themselves look belligerent and ridiculous. I'm not saying that we should deliberately set out to offend people. But I am saying that because some offense is inevitable, we shouldn't worry too much about it. The most important thing is to make yourself heard, and people whose highest concern is never offending anyone just make themselves that much easier to ignore. As the feminist trailblazer Susan B. Anthony said, cautious, careful people, always casting about to preserve their reputation and social standing, never can bring about a reform. Those who are really in earnest must be willing to be anything or nothing in the world's estimation. Third, as some of our other speakers have touched on, come out to your family and friends. One of the best things you can do to change the conversation about atheism is to be open about your non-belief with people who know you, people who already care about you and value your opinions. As the gay rights movement has found, this is one of the most effective ways of fighting prejudice in the long run. If you have religious relatives, this may lead to more arguments around the dinner table. But when someone knows an atheist, or rather when they know that they know an atheist, then they can no longer project their fear and hate onto a shadowy image in their head. They'll have to compare what they've been told about us to a real person. And in most cases, that will make their prejudice wither on the vine. And besides, we'll win those dinner table arguments. We always do, right? Of course, I realize this advice isn't for everyone. There are some atheists who can't afford to come out of the closet. If you're financially or socially dependent on people who you fear would retaliate against you, then keep silent, stay safe, and start making plans to get out of that situation as soon as possible. But if you can come out, I encourage you to do it. The more of us who do, the easier it will be for everyone else. Fourth, help people and do charity work. This is the complement to the last point, and it's one of the more effective ways to change the minds of people who don't personally know you. So many religious believers have been taught that atheists are bad, wicked, scary people, but it's pretty hard to sustain that image in your head when you hear about atheists volunteering at a homeless shelter or raising money for disaster relief. And once they get started on that line of thought, they may begin wondering what else they've been told about us that isn't true. This is like a kind of rhetorical judo move. It uses your opponent's harmful stereotypes of you against them. You can see some prominent examples of atheists engaging in charity work here. Bill Gates, who's an atheist and one of the largest individual philanthropists on the planet. There's also things like the micro-lending site Kiva, which gives money to entrepreneurs in the third world to start a business. The atheist community on Kiva is by far the largest and most generous lending community on that site. Fifth, take advantage of equal access. There are laws and court precedents saying that wherever there's a limited public forum, it has to be made available on an equal basis to everyone who expresses interest. We can use this. If religious clubs meet in your school, you can start a secular club, as you all probably know already. But what this means is that if administrators try to block you or stonewall you, you know the law is on your side. The same goes for if churches put nativity scenes on the town hall lawn. You can request equal time and space for a display of your own. The same goes for campus newsletters, bulletin boards, sidewalk chalkings, any public resource that religious groups use to get their message out. You can take advantage of it and use it for yours as well. Here's an example. This is the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Winter Solstice sign, which they put up in state capitol buildings that display nativity scenes and religious messages around the holidays. Most religious groups tend to get pretty upset when they learn that they have to share. The best part about this is that because atheism is so controversial, you're almost guaranteed to get media attention. And that will multiply the impact of your message and ensure that many more people hear about it than otherwise would have. The same goes for when ignorant local officials try to censor you, as they inevitably will sometimes. If you have to file a lawsuit, you'll win in a walk, and again, get yourself lots of free publicity in the bargain. Next, speak out and be fearless. Deny them the illusion of consensus. Human beings are herd animals. We tend to follow other members of our family, our tribe, our culture, our social circle. And under these circumstances, religion can derive a lot of its power from a bandwagon effect, a kind of self-sustaining momentum. Everyone says they believe it because everyone thinks everyone else believes it. But this widespread illusion of conformity conceals a huge amount of diversity and unorthodoxy in what people actually believe. Although polls show that around 80% of Americans consider themselves Christian, if you take the time to look beyond this superficial self-labeling, the evidence paints a very different picture. We know that the level of actual biblical knowledge among Americans is dismal. Only half can name even one of the 4 Gospels, and less than half can name more than 4 of the 10 Commandments. We know that the number of people who attend religious services every week is about half the number of people who say they do. We know that there are pastors, ministers, priests, actual clergy who are secretly atheists, but are still in the pulpit, preaching things they no longer believe because they don't want to hurt people's feelings, because they don't want to make waves, or because they don't see a way out that doesn't involve losing their job and their community all at once. This is the logo of the Clergy Project, an organization which gives support to closeted atheist clergy and helps them find a way out. We heard from one of them earlier today if you were at Jerry DeWitt's talk. Religion relies on social consensus and peer pressure to perpetuate itself. It's the emperor with no clothes. No one questions it because no one sees anyone else question it. But what happens when someone does question it? What happens when someone stands up, points the finger and says, "Hey, that emperor is naked"? What happens, hopefully, is that people realize that atheism is a live option. They realize that religious affiliation is indeed a choice and not unchangeable. They realize that leaving their religion is possible, and that you don't have to be religious to be a good person or to lead a meaningful life. If they're an elected official and they hear from you, they realize that not every voter is religious, and that there are secular voters whose values and concerns they should take into account. There's a political science term you should remember. It's called the Overton window. It says that for any political issue, there's a range of socially acceptable positions that's narrower than the range of possible positions. Ideas within the Overton window are seen as mainstream and uncontroversial, while those outside it are viewed as shocking, upsetting, and dangerously radical. But over time, the window can shift, and today's wild-eyed radicals may be tomorrow's sensible moderates. So how do you shift the Overton window? The answer is, you stand outside it and pull. Social change always begins with a few brave people who dare to advocate something previously inconceivable. But by their mere existence, by their willingness to stand fast on their principles and refuse to compromise, they stretch the boundaries of what the majority considers possible and redefine what counts as the moderate position. Just look at how familiar and accepted the idea of same-sex marriage is becoming, despite it being almost unthinkable just a few decades ago. Remember wind and water. This is my last and most important piece of advice. The church likes to think of itself as the church built on rock. And when it comes to the hardness of its followers' minds, it's not wrong. You can be a genius orator, you can be a scholar of religious history, you can come up with the most devastatingly brilliant arguments imaginable. And still, 99 times out of 100, you won't change people's minds. You certainly won't turn them into atheists on the spot. That's okay. We should expect it, and we shouldn't be disappointed when it happens. People don't undergo dramatic changes of opinion the first time they hear a new viewpoint. Human psychology just isn't that malleable. The persuasive power of reason is less like a great torrent that sweeps away castle walls, more like the slow, gentle dripping of falling water. What can water ever do to something as hard as rock? Well, I'll tell you, it can do this. As soft as it may seem, as gentle as it may seem, water is stronger than stone. It can carve vast canyons. It can wear hills away to nothing. Over billions of years, it's repeatedly reshaped the face of the planet. Is there a mountain in your way that you want gone? Run a river over it. It may take a couple of generations, so we have to be patient and keep the long view in mind. But it will happen. People's minds can be changed. We have a long way left to go, but look at how far we've come already. Thank you. The abolitionist movement won, the women's suffrage movement won, the civil rights movement won, The gay rights movement is winning. The atheist movement will be next. When we speak out, we win. The forces arrayed against us may seem strong and imposing, but we have one thing that they don't, the truth. And though that may seem like a small thing, in the right hands, it can move mountains. Thank you.